Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome to Muslim Wellness Foundation's monthly webinar. And this month, we have decided to focus on really delving into some of the coping strategies that we need as American Muslims to be able to cope with the rising anti-Muslim sentiment, as well as racism, the xenophobia, and some of the anxiety that many have begun to feel in the community. Unfortunately, in the wake of the San Bernardino shootings and the Paris attacks, we've seen almost an unprecedented rise in the number of incidents and hate crimes, some of which have been reported, some of which have not been, that the American Muslim community has really, struggled to grapple with in the last several weeks. So thank you again for joining us. We hope that it's beneficial. My name is Kameelah Rashad. I'm the founder and president of Muslim Wellness Foundation, and it is an organization which seeks to reduce stigma associated with mental illness, addiction, and trauma in the American Muslim community. And we do that through dialogue, education, and training. And what we found is that the dialogue piece, the ability to have space where we can open up and talk about some of these sensitive issues, is very, very crucial. So again, I just want to welcome everyone who's listening, who's watching, who will be watching later. This will be recorded. Thank you for your time. And again, we hope that it'll be beneficial. We have some very concrete strategies that we would like to share with everyone, but also just to get a sense of how other people are feeling. Along the way, if you do have questions, you're more than welcome to either post them to the Google event page, to the Facebook page, or under the comment section in the YouTube channel. So I'm going to introduce my two guests, Dr. Salmaan Toor from the Family Center of Knoxville. He has joined us for a previous webinar, but we wanted to bring him back, and this is probably, I think it was after the conversation we had about the Chattanooga shooting. And so we get a sense of some of the cyclical nature of how the community responds, or some of the things that we typically cope with after a horrific tragedy, whether the person involved is Muslim or not. So Dr. Salmaan Toor is a clinical psychologist practicing in Knoxville, Tennessee since 2012. He is the director of the Family Center of Knoxville, where he works as a licensed clinical psychologist. He currently provides therapy to children, adolescents, adults, and families. Dr. Toor was trained to be a psychodynamically informed therapist, and I'll allow him to explain what that means. But this approach understands the person based on what is happening with the person now and from the past. He regularly speaks to communities, organizations, and schools about mental health topics such as stigma, anxiety, stress management, parenting, child development, and identity formation. Within the Knoxville Muslim community, he facilitates discussions on how to recognize and address mental health issues. And he's also, if you guys don't know this already, has teamed up with the Knoxville-based Muslim media channel Eye Studios to start a mental health video series on YouTube called #MentalHealth. The series focuses on mental health education, but is also unique in that viewers are encouraged to ask questions and offer suggestions for further topics. So I just want to thank Dr. Salmaan Toor for being with us today. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam. Thank you for having me.
And our other panelists, Dr. Syed is completed her bachelor's degree in psychology from Purdue University. Her master's degree is in clinical psychology from the Illinois School of Professional Psychology at Argosy University, and her doctorate in clinical psychology from the Texas School of Professional Psychology in Dallas, Texas. And Dr. Syed has a broad range of experience working within the field of psychology, including diagnostic and vocational testing, career counseling, domestic violence, addiction, family and couples therapy, depression, anxiety. Again, we said wide range, so we're glad to have you with us, Dr. Syed. And her predoctoral experiences include neuropsychology testing, children and family, couples counseling, and inpatient psychiatric care. She is currently a consultant with the Khalil Center in Chicago, so I wanted to also thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. Walaikum assalam.
So we've all prepared, all three of us have prepared hopefully some beneficial information for everyone who's watching. And I wanted to give just an overview of what we'd like to present. We're each going to kind of carve out, take a little bit of this really complex topic and break it down from individual and couples to parent and caregivers and family. And then look at kind of a community-wide strategies to deal with essentially the psychological impact of anti-Muslim bigotry and hate and racism. So I'm going to begin with kind of a brief overview of what's called racial battle fatigue, microaggressions, because often what we find when you ask someone if they have experienced any kind of discrimination in the ensuing weeks after the Paris attacks, people will say, well, I haven't, nothing's happened to me. Like, no one's yelled at me in the street. No one's, you know, there's been no physical altercation. But what we do understand is that there's also this underlying sense of fear, of anxiety, of despair even. And so we want to talk about what those things usually indicate. Some of those are symptoms, but also how we can begin to really think about new language to describe what's happening. So if you bear with me. And before we get started, please feel free again, if you have a question that you would like one of the panelists or myself to answer, either post it to the Facebook page, to the Google event page. You can tweet at us is at MWF National, or you can again post those comments or questions to directly to the YouTube channel. And we'll pick those up. We'll have more than enough time, hopefully, to answer those questions. Okay, so here we are. Again, the webinar is American Muslims: Strategies for Coping with Racism and Anti-Muslim Hate. So here's just, again, a brief overview. I'll talk about racism, racial battle fatigue, Islamophobia, racial and religious microaggressions, some of those symptoms of distress and trauma, and also some community recommendations. Dr. Salmaan Toor will talk specifically to strategies for parent and caregivers and family members as a parent kind of dealing with fear and anxiety. And Dr. Syed will focus on couples and individuals. So the impact of this stress on marriages, on relationships. So those essential tips for couples, self-care strategies, and we'll have time, inshallah, for a Q&A. So what we know is that over, I would say, the last 3 to 4 weeks, we've seen images like this, either by mainstream media, either through Twitter or Facebook, and all of these images start to have an impact, consciously, subconsciously, on everyone's feelings of vulnerability, of safety, or the lack of safety. There have been numerous reports of Muslim women especially who are visibly Muslim, they wear hijab or khimar or headscarf, being attacked or verbally harassed. And so understanding that although you yourself may not have experienced an incident like this, just hearing reports of it could also generate feelings of anxiety. So psychological trauma really pertains to the idea that it's the result of stressful events that shatter your sense of security, making you feel helpless and vulnerable in a dangerous world. And that sense of vulnerability and helplessness, especially right after an incident, such as the San Bernardino shooting or the Paris attacks, where there's incredible scrutiny on the Muslim community, both as people seen as potential perpetrators, but then also becoming victims of these kinds of either microaggressions or outright hate crimes. it does, make you think about your sense of safety and security. MuslimGirl.net published a survival guide for Muslim women, just to think about, what are some of the recommendations or precautions, Muslim women in particular should use in order to stay safe in public. So in the ensuing days, the symptoms of trauma can manifest itself physically. And so it could be eating disturbances, sleep disturbances, sexual dysfunction, low energy, perhaps having headaches and migraines. And so we may not feel kind of emotional symptoms in the beginning, but it does take a toll on your body. Some of the emotional symptoms could be feelings of despair and hopelessness, depression, anxiety, fearfulness, feeling like things are out of control. And this is also some of the byproduct of kind of what is the goal of terrorism? It is to instill fear in the public. So there could be irritability, angry, or feeling resentful. Also, some people have reported feeling numb. That this is something that happens either so frequently, or there's so much going on. It's really hard to just want to block everything out. In terms of how you function mentally, you could feel really distracted, or just not being able to focus, kind of a level of mental exhaustion because of everything that's happened. So I do want to make sure we talk about also racism in the context of what's happening now in the American Muslim community. Because we're such a diverse community, we have to remember that there are many who are experiencing kind of multiple layers of either discrimination due to race or class. So if someone has some degree of, I would say, pre-existing stressors or vulnerability because of their gender, because of their class, or perhaps already being unemployed, having difficulty finding employment because now people are more suspicious of someone who even appears or is perceived to be Muslim. So this kind of has like a compounding effect, kind of weighs you down and makes the burden feel even heavier. So racial battle fatigue is a concept that was talked about by a researcher called William Smith, and looking specifically at African Americans, the result of constant physiological, psychological, cultural, and emotional coping with racial microaggressions and less than ideal and hostile or unsupportive environments. And so when you think about American Muslims of, various and kind of diverse ethnicities, cultures, racial backgrounds, being in environments that are either overtly hostile or, again, kind of those subtle acts of discrimination, or, not feeling safe, feeling that people are looking at you suspiciously, in your work environment or your neighborhood, contributes to, again, this level of fatigue that can become incredibly exhausting. So some physical symptoms of that could be headaches, higher kind of blood pressure, heartbeat, having an upset stomach, a loss of appetite, elevated blood pressure. And so many people may feel these things kind of in their bodies before they can identify what the emotional symptoms are. Some of those symptoms include, here's a pretty exhaustive list, but I'll highlight a few. And one is kind of constant anxiety and worrying. And for some people, this is not kind of fear based on something that is imaginary or unlikely to happen. It could be, I'm a student and I have a class late at night. Now I'm worried about, how am I going to make it home? Will I be safe? Should I make sure I travel with someone else. So that constant anxiety and worrying can also have a really detrimental effect on someone's emotional health. Thinking also about being hypervigilant, being kind of suppressing anger. People may feel angry that after, given the backlash that the American Muslim community has to deal with after any acts of violence, makes some feel angry, but they feel that they can't express that. So some may keep quiet, kind of be unable to sleep, or have intrusive thoughts and images, or feeling less confident in public, perhaps, that maybe perhaps you need to be a little bit more inconspicuous. So one of the things that we wanted to highlight was this idea of microaggressions, because, again, we can compare what seems to be very overt, blatant, acts of discrimination. But something that could be potentially even more insidious is the idea that microaggressions are considered kind of these everyday verbal or nonverbal slights or insults, whether it's intentional or not, that communicate hostile or derogatory messages to who you are as an American Muslim based solely on the fact that you're Muslim. So here are some examples. We're not going to go through all of them, but just again highlighting just a couple. So feeling, I know many Muslims can relate to the first one, alien in one's own land. So someone continuing to ask you where you from or where you were born. And if myself, I was born in Brooklyn. Some people look at me, kind of like, well, that's not what I mean, like, where are you really from? Or you speak English very well, what are you? When did you, immigrate here? And this is not the experience of every American Muslim. So another example would be, let's say, color blindness. It's like, well, when I look at you, I don't see color, or I don't see a Muslim, I just see a human being. But if your Muslim identity is something that's very important to you, having someone say that, I really don't see that, in some ways is not a compliment. It's kind of a denial of something that's very important to who you are and how you perceive yourself. So there's listed a few more examples. Again, but these are kind of insults, could be intentional or unintentional, but it leaves you feeling very uncomfortable, either with the conversation or how the person is asking this question, because the messages that are being sent, the subtle message is that you're not really American, you're a foreigner, that somehow you'll never really be seen as someone who's legitimately American because you're Muslim. So some examples of religious microaggressions, and this was from a study that was done on Islamophobia. Someone saying to you, okay, and this was a direct quote from someone who participated, you have to tell me. You got to tell me the truth. You go to the mosque and everything like that. When you go, do you ever hear anything like when the next bombing is going to be? Or another example would be someone saying something like, well, you know how your people are, like, where do you keep your bombs? Or, is someone in your family, kind of sympathetic towards ISIS? And they may even say this in a joking way, but again, it can have the effect or sending you the message that I really believe that there's something suspicious about who you are simply because you're Muslim. So I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to kick it over to Dr. Salmaan Toor to talk about, again, given the backdrop of racism, of these microaggressions that really tend to erode people's sense of who they are, their emotional health and well-being. We also have to remember that it's not only adults that experience these kinds of microaggressions or insults, but it's also our children, it's our young people that experience it as well. So we know that we want to be able to understand kind of the role those those concepts play, thinking about the symptoms of trauma, thinking about kind of this idea of racial battle fatigue, kind of always being in environments that feel either unsupportive or hostile. And then, moving into what are some of the ways that we can begin to address that so we maintain our level of health as a community. Okay, so you're up next.
Okay. Thank you, Kameelah. You did a great job laying the foundation, and I think it's something that we can all relate to, kind of just feeling like on edge for all the reasons that you kind of presented. So, as Kameelah said, I'll be talking a little bit about the parenting aspect and working with children in the sense of how do we work with our kids, or how do we explain what's happening in the current political and social environment. So Kameelah's already given you kind of a summary, but I wanted to add that being psychodynamically trained means basically what Kameelah said, in the sense of looking at who you are psychologically based on your early life, early childhood experiences, the current context, historical context, and I also wanted to put in there, like many of us, many people in the clinical field, we've had diverse training, and I think that's, that'll come up as we talk a little bit more, in the sense of how some of the things that we're going through as a Muslim community, other communities can relate to as well. So I apologize. One moment. So I wanted to start with some statistics related to what we're seeing with Muslims and teens and children and whatnot. But in a recent study, they found that over 50% of Muslim children report being the target of bullying, and the national average is about half of that. So what we're seeing recently is that Muslims are being bullied at almost double the rate of the national average, and even with that, less than half of bullying incidents are actually reported, so we're actually not too sure of the actual number. But, and I think kind of in relation to that, there's another statistic that shows that over half of Americans don't know a Muslim, right? So we have 50% of Muslims are being bullied, and then you have about 50% don't know a Muslim. And I don't think that's coincidental with the next statistic, right? Those who tend to know Muslims have a more positive view of Muslims. So what we're finding is that a lot of these feelings and this Islamophobia, or this hatred that we're seeing is related to just this unknown that people feel, and that leads to anxiety and the things that Kameelah had just spoken to. And then lastly, which again that'll come up later in our discussion, is about 2/3 of Muslim Americans are first-generation immigrants. Now certainly Kameelah spoke to it, and Muslims have been in America for hundreds and hundreds of years, right? They came over on the slave ships 500 years ago. But a significant portion, according to statistics, are first-generation immigrants, and that'll again come up to what we talk about later. So Islamophobia and you meaning the parent, right? So a lot of what we're facing is what comes with the idea of a phobia, right? And the underlying roots, the underlying mechanisms of phobia kind of break down into two things. And the first one is fear, the emotion of fear. And with any type of phobia, there's a fear or a scared experience around a specific thing. And then within that as well is that idea of anxiety. And anxiety in the sense of, feeling worried or nervous about something. And then, so to parents out there, I think before you speak to your children, right, the first thing you have to do is to be able to understand, what are you feeling in this moment, right? What is going on exactly for you? Is it fear? Is it anxiety? Is it something more than that? And then, so I think the first thing I always tell parents to do is take a deep breath, right? Because a breath is not going to cure anything. It's not going to solve a problem, but it'll provide you a little bit of levelness into really being able to understand what are you going through right now. And then to ask yourself, how does fear in general affect you? So maybe not in the sense of Islamophobia or the hate that we're kind of seeing right now, but just in general, when you're fearful, how does that affect you? And then secondly is, in general, how do you manage your anxiety? Because before you talk to your kids, what you want to do is you want to really try to present a calm and confident presence to them, in the sense of you're the parent, right? You're kind of the guardian, you're the protector, you're the one that kids believe have all the answers. That certainly may not be true, and you don't have to pretend to have all the answers, but before you talk about these things, I think it's really important to be aware of where are you at emotionally, right? And then to be able to say, how do I manage that when I'm trying to be a sense of social support, emotional support for my child. So to understand, am I being overwhelmed by the fear that I'm feeling? Am I overly anxious? And to be able to look at that, Kameelah gave a great kind of thorough list of all the kind of symptoms that you might be seeing. So you might want to look at it from 3 different aspects. The first being cognitive, and cognitive meaning kind of how it affects your thinking, and kind of the intellectual part of your mind and whatnot. And within that, a lot of times you find, with fear and anxiety, maybe you relate to the symptoms of feeling or to have an expansive thought process, in the sense of, okay, people don't like Muslims, that must mean that everyone doesn't like me, and then someone's out there to get me, and I need to get out of here because someone at any moment could bang on my door and try to do me harm, right? So you can see how quickly this catastrophic thinking goes from I'm feeling scared or worried to my life is in danger kind of. That doesn't mean that something like that can't happen. Unfortunately, we've seen some events, but a lot of times anxiety fuels the thinking to extremes.
Dr. Salmaan, can I interrupt you just for a second?
Sure.
I know you had some slides prepared, but I'm not sure you were able to pull them up on your screen share.
Let me see. Is it showing up now?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, sorry about that. I apologize. So the good part is we're only a little bit through the screen, so I'm going to go back and allow people to kind of see what we had said. And quickly, just a couple statistics. Half of the Muslim children in a recent survey found that reported being the target of bullying. The national average is about 25%, so we're seeing that the number within the Muslim community is about double. And then I don't think it's, like I said earlier, I don't think it's a coincidence, but about half of Americans say they don't know a Muslim, right? So what we're seeing here is that when you know somebody, when you've made a relationship with them, that probably serves as a preventative factor to things like bullying or any type of discrimination. And then another study found recently that people who know Muslims, that actually have relationships with Muslims, have a more positive view of Muslims. And I think none of us are surprised by that, because we all think we're pretty great people. And then lastly, and this will come up a little bit later, is that about 2/3 of Muslim Americans, from one statistic, suggest that Muslims are first-generation immigrants here in America. And certainly, as I said earlier, that Muslims have been present here for hundreds of years, dating back to the slave ships. But a significant part are first-generation immigrants, and that's something we'll talk about in a little bit. And again, Islamophobia breaks down into a couple of emotions, fear and anxiety. And I think for parents, before you talk to your children, right, take a deep breath and kind of ask yourself, how's fear affecting you in your daily life, and then also how is your anxiety affecting you, and how do you manage it? And again, we've kind of caught up, I hope, is that fear and anxiety. Kameelah gave a lot of a big, exhaustive, thorough list of some of the symptoms, and to break it down within yourself as a parent is, how does fear and anxiety affect me cognitively? How does it affect the way that I think? Right? Do I start to think kind of catastrophically that something really bad is going to happen to me? And how does anxiety tends to ramp that up? And then sometimes we become more impulsive and rash, and our decision making kind of breaks down when we're feeling overwhelmed by emotions or anxiety. And then emotionally, a lot of times, people, you may have been, having dialogue with your friends or family about this, and it's just that feeling of like, is this really happening? Like, how can people believe this? So there's that sense of derealization to where it's, it's kind of, is this real life? We can even, for some people, if they're under enough stress, they could have kind of paranoid thinking in the sense of, everyone's out to get me, that person is looking at me, that must mean they want to do me harm, or that person's not looking at me, and that must mean they're being really sneaky. So you got to be able to kind of assess yourself. And certainly, I think something to remember is that there's a healthy level of fear or any emotion, and there's a healthy level of anxiety, right? A lot of studies actually show that if you have a moderate level of anxiety, then that actually leads to, optimal performance in a lot of different ways. But this is a good way to kind of assess, am I being overwhelmed right now? Is the fear and anxiety as a parent with, children, is that placing me in kind of an unhealthy place psychologically and emotionally to where it's hard for me to function, it's hard for me to be there, whether in my work or as a parent for my child. And behaviorally, right, something that's very important is a lot of times when we feel overwhelmed, we want to socially isolate, right? We just want to be by ourselves, or we want to, pick up our kids from school and come home and close the blinds and lock the doors and just, take care of them and try to be safe. So if you find yourself to be less socially engaged or more withdrawn or disconnected from those around you, that might be a sign that you're feeling overwhelmed. And then, some of the things that Kameelah had mentioned about if you see a change in your appetite or your sleep or your energy levels, that could also be a sign that you're feeling overwhelmed, whether it's with anxiety or fear or another related emotion. So I think to kind of summarize that as a parent, right, you have to be able to see what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses, and then if you find yourself behaving differently or thinking differently, to be able to say that, okay, maybe what I've been reading has been a bit too much. Maybe I should put down my phone or stop reading articles, and certainly stop reading some of the comments in the comment section, and to try to find a level and kind of healthy state for yourself before speaking to your child. So I think, we had just mentioned that about half of Muslim kids are reporting being the target of bullying or discriminatory acts. I think the first thing you want to do with your child is whatever they're feeling is to normalize those feelings, right? So even if you don't agree with that feeling, to be able to let your child know that it's okay, that whatever they're expressing, that's how they feel, and that's okay. And I think something to consider as we go through each one of these things is, each child is different, and sometimes they want you to listen, and sometimes they want you to come up with a strategy or solution, and to keep that in mind when we're kind of going through each one of these things. I think the next thing to do is kind of validate how your child is feeling, to let them know, again, that it's okay that they're feeling sad or angry or happy or confused or any of the things that they're feeling, because one, again, you may not agree with it, but two, if you validate your child, it lets your child know that you're listening. It lets them know that you're attuned to their experience. And when people, adults or children, feel that way, they trust you more, they tend to be more open with you, and they are more open to working with you to coming up with a common goal. I think within that as well as you have to consider the age of your child, and that's kind of the developmental process or the developmental progress that your child is at. And there's two things to consider, right? Your child could be very smart, right? Intellectually, they could be beyond their years if they're a fifth grader, but they're testing as an eighth grader, right? We hear about that a lot. But you also have to consider their emotional world, right? So a child can understand something intellectually, but emotionally it may be very difficult for them to process the information that you're giving them. So consider the ages of your children, and the older that your child is, maybe you can give a little bit more information. If your child is under the age of 7, 8, 9, you tend to want to give kind of simple responses. There's probably not a need to go into the root cause of terrorism and things like this, or the root cause of Islamophobia, or violence, or things like that. But if they're a little bit older and you have found them talking about that, or they've been able to engage you in kind of higher level conversations of these kind of things, then you can kind of consider it. But at the same time, you may feel that your child is old enough to deal with something, but you have to pay attention to, okay, we just had this conversation, or this has been going on, and are they, do I see a change in their mood or their behavior or their appetite or their sleep pattern? And if you do, then it might mean that even though they're saying they can handle things, they may not be able to handle it as well as they suggest. So 2 things to consider is, 1, certainly the age of your child, but also where are they intellectually? What kind of things can they understand? Can they understand abstract concepts versus simple things? And then emotionally, where's your child in the sense of how much are they able to handle emotionally? Are they, quote unquote, a more sensitive child? Do they tend to express their feelings or kind of suppress them, and then it all comes out? So these are all things you have to consider as a parent, and I know that sounds like a lot, but I think most parents have at least a decent gauge of how their kids' emotional makeup is, so consider that kind of thing. And then lastly, for children, it's important to co-create a plan with them. So certainly there are times where kids need guidance, and it's, the parents have to take the reins and steer the horse, but a lot of times it's good to co-create a plan, especially with teenagers, because when you co-create something, it empowers not only yourself, but your child as well. It helps them feel like they're a part of this process, so it gives them a sense of control, at least with the plan, even when they feel out of control with what's happening around them. And then it also helps them with guidance and direction. So a lot of times we create a plan because we feel we don't have control and we feel like we don't have direction, and that's what stirs our anxiety. So if you can create a plan that empowers both of you, right, to give them specific instructions on what to do in a certain situation, it can also give them a sense of control, which can decrease anxiety, and a sense of direction, meaning that, okay, I know what to do if this thing happens, and that can also decrease the fear aspect of it. And just a couple of things, if you are going to read things, there's some fantastic resources out there for Muslims. Kameelah's organization is a great one. She shares quite a few articles that I feel talk about this topic specifically, but opens up the dialogue of what a lot of Muslims are going through. Mental Health for Muslims is another resource that provides information regarding mental health and what to do, and with an Islamic perspective to it as well. And then I've, disclaimer, this is my article, but I've written a little bit about, on my website, about more specific steps to what you can do to kind of safeguard yourself and your children. And lastly, for teens, sometimes it's just they're more comfortable talking to someone outside of their home or their life. So here are a few phone numbers that are anonymous, and a couple of them are where you talk to other teenagers who have been trained in mental health first aid skills and whatnot, or other professionals where sometimes it's helpful just to, if you're feeling fearful or anxious, your child can or your teen can call some of these resources just to talk about what they're going through. So I hope this was helpful. Smile, because smiling does release endorphins that decrease anxiety and fear. And I apologize for the technical difficulty earlier. Give me 3 or 4 more times and I'll get it, inshallah. And now I'll hand it off to Sarah to talk about how the current situation is affecting couples and families and some self-care strategies.
Thank you, Salmaan. Is my microphone okay? Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm not sure why I'm getting an echo.
Your mic's a little an echo.
Okay, I'm just going to get started. I'm not sure because I can hear myself, so hopefully you guys are just hearing it once. But assalamu alaikum, everybody, and thank you very much both to Kameelah and Dr. Salmaan for getting us started and laying the foundation. I don't want to repeat too much of everything that Dr. Salmaan said, And Kameelah said, but of course, stress affects individuals, and individuals make up couples. So obviously, how the stress impacts you is going to affect you when you're in a relationship and when you're part of a couple. So let me pull up my slides and share all that with you guys. So I'm going to be talking about addressing your partner's stress as well as your own, and then some strategies for self-care. So first of all, how does stress impact a relationship? So we are, of course, talking about stress in general, and that is understood, I hope, that specifically this means, when Islamophobia, anti-Muslim hate, racism, these things are impacting us right now, I'm going to say almost on a regular basis. So it's really hard to avoid not hearing it unless, like Dr. Toor said, you turn off the phone, you turn off the TV and avoid it on purpose. Ignoring stress can make it worse and cause tension between a couple. Stress can cause partners to be unable to relax and not enjoy each other or fulfill their duties in the relationship, meaning like their duties to each other, meaning their household chores, just whatever. It can impact your actions, behavior, both verbal and nonverbal communication. And of course, when couples are in stress, they tend to fight more. As humans, we sometimes withdraw from each other, kind of like Kameelah and Dr. Salmaan mentioned. We isolate, we can feel disconnected, feel sad, frustrated, and angry. So all of these are the reasons why it's so important to make sure that we are doing something to realize that we are under stress. And again, next will be to work on minimizing the impact and to try to deal with minimizing the stress for ourselves and for our partner. So like I said, recognizing stress symptoms. So are you going through any of these things? Are you feeling irritable? Are you getting short-tempered? Recognizing that you're undergoing stress is really important, and something that usually in our busy everyday kind of lives we don't always pay attention to. So to recognize it is going to be the first step in supporting your partner through this kind of stress. Approach your partner. So if you're recognizing it, you're aware, it seems like, okay, something looks off, approach them. What's going on? And I'm going to share with you that, when the whole incident, the shooting in San Bernardino happened, the first day I was in a bad mood. We didn't know yet who had done it or what had happened, but I realized that evening that it really affected me, because after hearing about it, I was not in a good mood that day. And then the next day when we heard the names of who had allegedly done the shooting and who was responsible, I noticed the same thing in my husband, that he was not as open and not as communicative that day. And so once we kind of recognized that, I did approach him and we discussed it. And there were times where it's hard to listen. And my next point is to listen to your partner. And I put that in caps because, again, it can be hard. Sometimes you want to interject and be like, no, it's not this, it's that, or don't take it like this and whatnot. But when someone's going through something that's affecting them, listen to them. Comfort your partner. Be there. Be compassionate. That means you got to put their needs first for a few minutes, right? So you may have a different opinion about what's going on. You may feel differently, but this is what they're going through. So when we're supporting our partner, that means being there for them. Sometimes we have to look at if their burden can be temporarily lessened. So that means, like, if you've got kids, for example, and it's usually mom who does bedtime duty, maybe that day dad can do it. If the husband usually takes care of the dishes in the evening and he's the one going through some extra stress, maybe his partner can do it that evening. Whatever burden you may have, or just let some of the chores go that day. Maybe we can work on it over the weekend, and something that helps you feel a little bit more relaxed. That can make a big difference in helping you get over a bad mood or get over feeling stressed out. Get active with the exclamation mark on purpose, because exercise is an excellent way to help you manage stress. And doing something active together can be great for your relationship. So, I'm in the Chicago area and it's starting to get cold again, so maybe it might not be outside, but if you're someplace where you can go take a walk or go on a bike ride, that could be a really great way to be active, spend some time with your partner, and definitely, not have not be bombarded with the news, with TV, with phone stuff, reading about or hearing about what's going on, and just kind of turn off for a little while. And the last one says, care for yourself and encourage your partner to do the same. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about what that means, but part of supporting your partner is also making sure you care for yourself. You can't do for someone else if you're not doing well. So if you want to be there for your partner, if you want to be there for your family, you know, like Dr. Salmaan mentioned, and how to recognize stress symptoms with your kids and how to be able to be there for them, it really does start with taking care of yourself. Making sure your own stress is managed, making sure that you are recognizing your own stress and you are aware of it and you're working on it. Realistically, men and women can react differently to stress. And of course, this does not mean, you know, my points here do not mean that every woman is like this or every man is like this. This is just kind of general. But traditionally, like sometimes we look at things differently. We process things differently. So, for example, I have clients who sometimes will say, like, well, my husband tells me to shrug it off, who cares, you know, don't think about it. And if she could shrug it off that easily, she would. Nobody likes to feel stressed out. Nobody wants to feel worried. It's just not something she can do. Maybe that's how, you know, you handle stress, but if that would work for someone else, then I think that they probably would do it. So that can end up causing more harm than good. And also, sometimes I've had male clients tell me that they appreciate offers of assistance or just appreciation and recognition of tasks that they're doing, that's what helps them feel motivated and helps them feel like they're helping out. You know, women may appreciate feeling wanted or receiving expressions of comfort. So, yes, you're listening, but are you responding? Does she feel like she's wanted by you, like that you want her to talk to you, that you want her to be there and listen, that you want to listen, and that you're expressing comfort to her, you know? And having open communication with your partner, ask, how can you help? So if you're struggling, if you can see that your partner is stressed out, and it's pretty possible right now that you also are stressed out, communicate with each other what that means for you guys. Communicate how your partner can be of help to you, how your family can be of help to you, but also be aware that, you know, people respond differently to stress. So what does practice self-care mean? I've heard people ask me, like, does self-care mean, you know, like just go get a massage, get a facial, and that would be great, but no, that's not what that means. Self-care means being accepting of your limits and knowing when you need to take a break. So, like I said earlier, you can't help someone if you aren't doing well. You have to be doing well. You have to be relaxed to be able to help someone else relax. If you're upset, you're not going to help anyone else be less upset. And of course, during periods of stress, that is when we tend to disregard our needs and our limits the most. And that's really when we need it the most. So being aware of what your needs are and being aware of what your limits are is very important. I really can't stress this enough. I know Dr. Salmaan mentioned it also. Turn off the TV. Really just turn it off. It's important to know what's going on in the world. I'm not denying that in the least. But when you have it on all the time, when you have your phone on all the time, when you're getting alerts to every new article, that's exhausting. That's literally exhausting. There's only so much you can handle sometimes. And when you start to feel overwhelmed, you got to turn it off. You got to take a break from it. You know, or set aside time that from this time to this time is going to be just for me to relax. Maybe that means watch a sitcom. Maybe that means, you know, turn off the screens completely and talk to my partner or read a book or spend time with my kids, or, you know, maybe engage in some kind of activity like we said earlier, you know, something around the house or something active, go to the gym. But essentially, what self-care means is to be active, get enough sleep, eat properly, and preserve your boundaries. So, like we said earlier, being active could be in or outside the house. Get enough sleep is really important. A lot of adults think, for some reason, that 3-4 hours is plenty, and that's just not true. You might be able to manage on a couple hours here and there, but regularly you should be getting properly 6 to 8 hours of sleep, restful sleep. And if you're not, that can really catch up to you. That can definitely affect your physical health. Kameelah mentioned a lot of different physical things that can happen to the body when you're under stress, and not getting enough sleep can also contribute to that. Make sure you eat properly. When we are stressed out, we tend to reach for comfort food sometimes. Sometimes people have no appetite. Sometimes people have a lot more appetite than usual. Be aware of what's going on. It's one thing to have, like some extra comfort food one night, but if you find yourself doing it every night and you find yourself eating more and more every night, that can grow into a problem really fast. If you have no appetite and you're barely eating, that can also be a problem. So make sure that you are managing your stress and eating properly. And finally, preserve your boundaries. That means if you can't handle hearing any more of this, realize that, and not just turn off the TV or the phone, but if you're around people who are constantly talking about it, that might mean you need to cut that conversation short and leave. I've had people say, like, I couldn't handle hearing about this anymore, but I felt rude, I didn't want to leave, so I stayed. And unfortunately, sometimes when you get overwhelmed, you might not have as much control over the situation. I remember one time somebody just getting really overwhelmed with a conversation, and they kind of snapped at someone and got rude and felt remorse about it. But you have to be aware of your limits. If you're getting overwhelmed, you need to step away. If you need to take a day off, if you need to take a personal day, you got to be aware of that. Your work is important, your children are important, your family is a priority, but all of those are only possible if your health is okay. And when you're not doing well, you're not going to be able to do a good job taking care of anyone else. So you got to make sure you're taking care of yourself. When you are working on self-care techniques, be honest with yourself, right? How much is what you're seeing on the news impacting you? So just like we said earlier, how much do you keep thinking about what you have been reading? How much do you feel singled out or self-conscious? Be aware of that. Prioritize your needs. Be more flexible with your schedule. Know what your boundaries are. So maybe this is a day that you weren't planning to take the family out for dinner on a weeknight or something, but if you come home really stressed out, maybe that's not the day to stick with what your schedule was. Maybe that's the day we should just order pizza or go out. Be flexible when you're going through stress to help you manage it. Check in with yourself. Do you need to be around family? Do you prefer to spend some time with friends? Is it a good idea to take some time off and spend the day with your kids? Check in with yourself and be honest with yourself. Like, know what your needs are and prioritize them. This is essentially what self-care means. And finally, ask for help. Whether that's a therapist, whether that's a family member, your partner, your mom, your sister, your dad, a good friend, go to who you feel safe to talk to, who you feel comfortable to talk to, and let them know how you're feeling. Let them know what's going on. Get it off your chest. A lot of times these days, I think that people feel like, well, everyone else is also going through this, so what's the point of, telling someone else? But people, again, experience stress differently, so it's not necessary that, other people in your life are experiencing it the same way, and sometimes hearing someone else's perspective can help. So ask for help, speak up, and take care of yourself. Self-care is not a luxury. Self-care is personal, and you are the only one who can take care of it. Organizing your environment can help your life feel less chaotic, and you're the only one that knows if you need a massage or you need to go for a run, right? Do what works best for you and is within your means, so that you can keep it up on a regular basis and take care of yourself. So that's it for my slides, and hopefully people found that helpful. And I'm going to turn it back over to Kameelah, and like she mentioned earlier, please let us know if you have any questions or there's anything we can answer for you.
Okay, thank you both so much for, the overview of what's helpful for individuals, for couples, for families, and there were just a few points that I wanted to highlight. And one is that people experience stress differently, and we always hear about the idea of on an airplane you have to put the oxygen mask on yourself first, and so in situations like this, I think it's important for us to also model what that looks like, because our children will pick up on and other people around us, not just children, they'll pick up on some of these subtle signs that we're feeling overwhelmed. But if we tell them, oh, I'm fine, like I'm just okay, then we start to confuse them because they're like, well, I know my wife is acting differently, or say my mom or my child, but because you may not have really kind of tuned into some of the things that are going on, it may send kind of conflicting messages. And so I think it's important. One point you made, Dr. Salmaan, is that we have to kind of be honest with ourselves and normalize these feelings. And there's a concept kind of related to racial battle fatigue, which is called John Henryism, like this idea that we have to be very stoic in the face of what's happening. And so this kind of prolonged, it's called prolonged sort of high effort coping. And sometimes, you know, I think about even the toll that it takes on individual community members when there's, you know, we see this cycle of kind of continued condemnation, and then there's press releases, there's, you know, kind of a hyper focus on the community, but we also need time to kind of grieve and try to understand what's happening. And often we're not given that space to do it. So it may come out, you know, because we feel like, well, we have to kind of be strong and portray a certain image of the community, but we're also feeling very scared and overwhelmed, and honestly confused and fearful, all of those range of emotions. So I think it's important, like you said, to normalize, but also to understand that the stress impacts each person differently, and, you know, and this is sometimes assuming that there aren't already stressors, right? Because people's lives continue, right? So it could be someone in your family is ill. It could be threat of unemployment for whatever reason. Kind of marital stress that already existed before this happened, and this places even a greater burden on it. So I think it's important, you know, one thing that I would advise, you know, to the community is give yourself permission to say, I'm feeling overwhelmed. You know, whether or not that's in prayer, that's to someone else that you trust, but to say, I'm feeling overwhelmed, and period, and the end, right? Instead of this kind of need to immediately fix it, or say, well, what do we do now? You know, I have to be a good neighbor, I have to be a good colleague, because everyone is thinking about, you know, how American Muslims are responding, but we really do need to allow ourselves to be human and to feel, and to understand that this is also having an impact on our emotional health, in ways that I think we aren't going to be able to fully understand until perhaps we have some distance and we can reflect on kind of the constant toll this is taking on us. So I wanted to offer also some community-wide strategies, that we think about the individual and kind of parent and caregivers and family, but also as a community, how can we help one another in working through some of these difficult times. So I'm going to So I'm going to start here, you know, with the idea of coping with distress. And it goes without saying for many, or maybe not, but, you know, one of the ironies is that in really difficult times, people do turn to their spiritual practice, whether it's prayer or it's meditation. And for some people, they may feel that any increase of you know, kind of outward displays of religiosity, or any outward displays of, you know, maybe there's, you know, you want to go to the mosque more because you want to, you know, be in a place where you can pray with other people, but perhaps feel like some anxiety, like, well, will someone think that, you know, my level of increased religiosity is related to perhaps in some way some degree of propensity for extremism, because what we hear in the media is, oh, this person wasn't devout, but then they started attending the mosque more. I mean, this is kind of the narrative that is kind of put forth in the media. But I would encourage people, for people of all faiths, whenever they're going through any type of diversity, most people will say that they do rely on spiritual practice, some form of prayer, whether it's silence or it's reading, or some kind of supplication to get through those times. So we as Muslims also definitely rely on that as a way to manage all of the difficult things that we're dealing with. The other thing is, in the community, there is a lot of stigma associated with counseling, with mental health, but we also have to be sensitive to the fact that there are people in our community who may already be feeling some anxiety or depression completely unrelated to these events, so they're already vulnerable in some way. So we want to encourage people, especially if we see signs that they have been in distress or emotional, having some degree of anxiety or even irritability. It may not even look like depression, but just anger and irritability, that we encourage them to seek out qualified mental health professionals that can help someone deal with the added stress. We also, many people are reluctant to explore the use of medication, either short or long term, to stabilize the mood. But again, we should feel comfortable thinking about what are all of our options, whether that ranges from prayer and spiritual practice to counseling to medication to diet and exercise. And this is where the community comes in. It's really reducing that stigma, providing the support and the understanding and the empathy. You could have someone who's very sensitive in nature, and Dr. Salmaan mentioned that about children. You may have a child that's very sensitive, and you may have another that seems to kind of go along pretty unscathed and unbothered by certain things. But that could be true of adults as well. Some may be able to deal and cope in very different ways, but we want to be mindful of, individuals in our community who are already vulnerable. And that leads to, a better collaboration between mental health professionals and religious leaders, informal leaders in the community. Often the imam is asked to kind of address mental health issues, but there are other people who are very much involved and plugged into the community that can also be a resource. So some of the strategies on a community-wide level really looks like creating opportunities for dialogue and healing within the community. So actually one of the things I thought about today is that we do often have kind of immediate condemnation from some of our leaders of, terrorist attacks and of violence. There's either a press release or some kind of official statement that's made. But what I would encourage our leaders to also do is to directly address community members' anxiety, and to say, I recognize, many people recognize that this is a difficult time for us, and here are some ways that we can begin to talk about what that means for us, how it changes even maybe our daily schedules. Perhaps, I've heard a lot of parents saying, well, I'm not sure I want to send my children to Sunday school. Perhaps we have an iftar on Thursdays, but now people are afraid to come to the mosque because of a threat that's either, happened before or that's, just kind of becoming known. So we want to kind of make sure we direct some of our focus inward. And so that coming from the leader, yes, there can be statements that are made condemning the actual violent act, but knowing the cycle of the backlash on the American Muslim community, encourage our leaders to also make a statement directly to the community to say, we understand that there's a lot of fear and anxiety, but we also put our trust and faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in God, and we also want to create some space and some opportunity for people to share what that's like, so individuals don't feel like they're dealing with this alone, that they're the only ones who feel this kind of pressure. So that could take the form of kind of a community town hall, a community dialogue, whether it's in person or online, things like that. But, understanding that it's important for us to acknowledge that this is having an incredible impact on us emotionally, and recognizing that on a community level. So, not just in times of distress, but there being ongoing conversations and discussions about wellness. So forming a wellness committee or like a mental health first aid team that can begin to collaborate with one another when we have incidents, but we can have these ongoing check-ins with, kind of like taking the temperature of the community. How are people doing? Are there existing vulnerabilities? Is, some stressor going to have a really detrimental impact? And how do we address it proactively? So again, kind of encouraging a holistic understanding of wellness. So that's spiritual, that's mental, that's physical. We have incredible untapped resources in our community. We have people who are social workers and doctors, yoga practitioners. I mean, there's a wide range, but understanding that because symptoms of trauma may manifest themselves physically, emotionally, cognitively, we have to pay attention to the whole person. And we can never have enough education. So some mental health problems like anxiety and depression are common. So we want to make sure that there is support that's available before a crisis. And lastly, normalizing suffering and distress as part of the human experience. So seeking help for this is not a sign of weakness. One proverb that I really appreciate, says closed mouths don't get fed. So if you're not able to articulate or express some of the deep distress that you're feeling, it can become worse over time. Again, wanted to emphasize the power of prayer, of supplication. So this is one is, I seek refuge in you, God, from anxiety and sorrow, from weakness and laziness, from fear and miserliness, overwhelming debt, and from being overpowered by men. And so this is a supplication that we can say, again, reminding ourselves that if we put our faith and trust in God, but we also understand that we have other resources at our disposal, we feel more empowered and less helpless. Again, just remembering the mercy and the compassion that is incorporated and built into our practice. So in the Quran, when it says, "Verily, in the remembrance of God, of Allah, do hearts find rest," and He says, "Remember me, and I will remember you." So if we're feeling a moment of panic or just maybe even terrified, thinking about what could possibly happen, or worried about our children, taking a second, even if it's just that 1 minute, and maybe even putting like 30 seconds or a minute on your phone just to sit and reflect or think, do some kind of meditation to help calm you and to take deep breaths. I mean, these are things that are quick and easy that we can do, but we often have to be reminded. One of the last things I wanted to mention is that there's a concept called post-traumatic growth. And what that means is, how does someone overcome adversity and kind of gain strength and insight and wisdom as a result of the adversity that they've faced? So it could be increased spiritual development, so even a deeper faith in God, and a deeper commitment to practicing or to understanding who you are as a Muslim could be one of the positive outcomes of some of the very real stress that we're under right now. A greater appreciation for what you do have, and being able to express that gratitude, that these are situations that are very difficult, often hostile, and kind of fear-provoking, anxiety-producing, but there's an appreciation for the things that we do have, and that also keeps us humble. It's also a time where we can develop even more meaningful relationships, and this is why it's important to to communicate with your spouse and with your children, because you can have deeper conversations about some of the challenges that you're facing, and then develop some empathy for other people who may be going through the same thing. And it's important to think about strength and resilience. So it's, yes, we're dealing with a very difficult time, but the community has also been incredibly resilient. And that's something that I think we should remind ourselves. You know, this is, for some of our children, depending on their age, this is a climate that they've known pretty much all their lives to some degree or another. But we still have incredible children and spouses and community members, and so we don't want to become so focused on negative that we are not able to appreciate what is positive and how the community has grown in so many just beautiful ways. And then lastly, what are some new possibilities? So maybe we think about, again, if we have a community town hall where we're talking about, here are some of the difficulties, but here are some of the great ways that we've managed to kind of meet this crisis head on, and that we're able to kind of forge through in a healthy way, and rise to the occasion. So this kind of conquering the adversity also creates new possibilities. And we see that with some of the interfaith work that has been generated as a result of these events. We've had very different conversations internally within the Muslim community, but also how we talk about ourselves. What is our story as American Muslims? You know, how diverse is it? How rich is our story? And wanting to communicate that to other people. So these are some of the possibilities that we've also been able to see occur as a result of some of the tragedy. This is just information about Muslim Wellness Foundation, and I'll come back to that, but I do want to open it up to a few questions that I received. Okay. So I'm back, and I want to pull you guys in to kind of get some of your reflections or some of the questions that you may have gotten in the last either couple of days or couple of weeks. What would kind of be your best advice for people who are still struggling, either individually or as family members? They're concerned about perhaps, you know, a child or a young adult. I've seen many stories just recently in the Washington Post and also New York Times about young adults, you know, who were very, very young when 9/11 occurred. So this is the atmosphere that they've really struggled with for quite a while. So just, I'm interested in kind of getting your insights or kind of reflections about that.
So one of the biggest things that I've been seeing, you know, and you and I both mentioned this, Kameelah, is that people respond differently, and people are affected by stress differently. So if you feel like, you know, my sibling or my friend is overreacting or something, you know, that's not helpful. Somebody who's experiencing this, to really be there with them, whatever they're going through. I mean, this can be really scary right now, and it's an unfortunate reality, but this is our reality. So if you are one of, I'm going to say, the lucky ones who's not experiencing it that way, you know, be compassionate with people around you who are experiencing it worse. And I really want to, you know, reemphasize what you mentioned about the power of prayer, because when we turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and you know, seek our peace and patience in Him, you know, that can help you feel more calm, and that's a great example for your family also. Like, your kids are watching you, you know, even your partner, your spouse is watching you, and that's a great way to try to help you relax in between all of, you know, the million things that all of us do every day. You know, to take some little, like, I love that suggestion you gave about 30 seconds or a minute. It doesn't have to be hours. We don't have to turn it into a ceremony, right? But just a few minutes here and there. Take some time and make dua. Make dua for your family. Make dua for your country. Make dua for our leaders. You know, there's people right now who consider themselves leaders that it's very alarming to imagine anyone giving them leadership. We don't need to name names. But you know, make dua for them to be guided and to get guidance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that it's a scary time right now, but it doesn't have to be. You know, and I'm sure Dr. Salmaan has a lot to say, but I do want to add that I feel like for every negative story I'm hearing, I'm also hearing quite a few positive ones of neighbors reaching out, of people approaching masjids, people approaching, you know, classmates, and offering their help, offering their support. I can honestly say in the last 2 weeks, I have been told more time by random people that my hijab looked really nice. And I'm not really sure why, other than maybe it was their way of showing support. So, you know, and like you said, be grateful for that. Let yourself enjoy that gratitude, you know, allow yourself to feel that gratitude.
No, I certainly agree with what Dr. Sarah, Kameelah, what you guys said in the sense of we've got to find balance. And I think one thing to really think about, certainly within our own community, is that sense of empathy and that idea that we have to be able to empathize with one another, to where if one of us is really overwhelmed by this and fearful and angry or whatnot, right, to be able to put ourselves in the other person's shoes, even if we don't feel exactly how they feel, but to be able to say, okay, this is really impacting this person, instead of saying, what's wrong with you, to be able to say, well, wow, let me better understand your experience so that I can really attune with you. Because, you know, after practicing with adults or kids and, you know, couples and whatnot, there's so much power and there's so much value in knowing that someone is connected with you and someone hears you, even if they can't change your situation. There's a lot of value in, okay, this person knows my story and they get it, and that can be so relieving. And I think that, you know, that goes to prayer, to where when we feel like we're connected with Allah, that, you know, that's a comforting thing, right? Even before Islamophobia and whatnot, right? There's many situations to where we give people advice that if you and your spouse, or if you are feeling angry or resentful, right, go pray 2 rakat and just see if that's that 1 or 2 minutes that kind of levels you out, to where it gives you a different perspective or changes your mood. So I think empathy, certainly within our community, and I think we'll get to it in a little bit, but even the idea of outside of our community is something that we really need to focus on.
I did have one question for you, Salmaan. Someone asked if you could share the source or the website for the stats that you started with, about 50% of American Muslim children, and we can provide those either kind of following up, or if you have that now and you can kind of let the audience know.
Yeah, I have it in another document. I closed it, but I'll definitely get it to everyone. It's certainly a reputable one, and it might have been, I don't want to guess, but it might have been Pew, like Pew did their own, you know, research or whatnot. But, you know, what I did do is I validated those with a couple of different studies, in the sense that, right, because on the internet you can find whatever statistic you want. So I said, well, that sounds right, but so I'll definitely get that to everyone, inshallah. Because, yeah, I think those are important things to know. Yeah. I think that's one of the things we have to do, right? We have to educate ourselves, so when we do enter this dialogue, instead of saying it's not fair, or, you know, that's not right, we can back it up with actual statistics. And people, you know, if someone's non-Muslim, the word you get that from, they can say, well, actually, it came from this. That's important.
Yeah.
Actually, I wanted to say something. That's a really good point you brought up, because the other thing that I've kind of been experiencing is people are coming to me, especially I'm noticing, like, adolescents, like late teens, early 20s even, who hear some of these things on TV or their peers say stuff, and they don't know that it's not true. They don't know that, you know, what people consider verses from the Quran are not, or that they're being, you know, mistranslated or misinterpreted. So, you know, when you're talking to your kids and when you're discussing it, make sure you're learning about your religion, you're learning about your deen, because again, the first line of defense is going to be you. If someone says something to you and you believe it, I mean, it feels bad, you don't want to hear that, but it's even worse if you actually believe it. So, and I've encountered that a couple times, where, so with kids too, you know, where they didn't know that the stuff that people said wasn't true. So talk to people about it. Talk to your, you know, whoever you go to, your imam, your religious scholar, your teachers, and ask questions when you feel confused.
I think that's a really great point, because, you know, I've said before, it's almost like every Muslim is expected to have the level of religious scholarship or knowledge of their religion almost comparable to a priest, right? You should know, and children too. And when they hear these things repeatedly, either on television or they read it or they overhear it from friends who may be hearing it from their family members at home, and then they're bringing it to school, is really important. I think, what I'd like to do is even to come up with a list of questions that parents can ask their children about their school day. I've seen this before, but really tailoring it to helping parents sort of kind of process with their children in a very indirect way, because sometimes they know when we're trying to dig for information. But in an indirect way, ask them, like, how was your day related to this? Because I was talking to a group of Muslim girls, I think between the age of like middle school to high school, and I asked them, it was about 50, and I asked them, how many of you have experienced some kind of slight, right? Whether or not it was overt or kind of a microaggression in school. All of them raised their hands, 50 of them. And when I asked, how many of you have spoken to your parents about that? None of them had spoken to their parents, and they said, well, either because their parents were already kind of stressed out about something, or they didn't think that their parents were going to be productive. Like, I don't want my mom or my dad to come to school and kind of make things worse for me. And so I think that would be helpful, either both for parents, but also I think for leaders in the community to have some questions that can be asked to kind of gauge the temperature of community members and figure out kind of what is the general sentiment. And then on the other hand, how do we support our leaders? How do we support imams who, may be fielding the questions and, the inquiries and the voicemails and, the requests for statements? So we have to make sure that we're checking in with each other. And that may look very different depending on your culture. We're talking about communication, but that may look very different, depending on your family background and, and maybe not just cultural, just your family is just not very talkative or very expressive, but finding other ways to check in to make sure that people are okay. So we're nearing the end of the webinar. I just wanted to give each of you an opportunity to let people know how to get in contact with you and any kind of last parting words. Salmaan, do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, and certainly, that's one of the things when we talk about resources. I think, alhamdulillah, everyone that I've met through Kameelah's foundation and whatnot, even if we're in Philly or Chicago or small town Knoxville, right? We're a phone call away or an email and whatnot. And I've yet to meet a clinician that said, no, you live in Colorado, I can't speak to you. So I think it's important for everyone to know that we're all here for each other, and even if that's a 2-minute conversation or a referral to someone in your area, there are plenty of resources. Yes, you may have to look for it, but I know there's, Kameelah, maybe you can speak to it. I know there are Muslim organizations that are making lists, a directory of mental health professionals. So I know Mental Health for Muslims has one. I believe Kameelah's foundation has one, but she can speak more to that. And I think one of the things that really stuck out for me as I was preparing for this presentation was the idea that it's not our duty to go out and meet non-Muslims and kind of show how we live, but if you, again, if you look at history, every single minority has gone through this, and that doesn't make it fair and that doesn't make it right, and not just people of color, right? If you look up the history of Catholicism, right there, up until 50, 60 years ago, there was a very negative view of Catholics, right? And now they're one of the best viewed populations. So I think if, we as Muslims know we're fantastic people and we do a lot of great things for our communities and the national and globally and whatnot, we have to keep reaching out. We have to be able to, we not necessarily say, hey, what's your name? You want to know the 5 pillars of Islam? But to be able to say, like, as a Muslim, it's been kind of anxiety-provoking with all the stuff that's been happening, and it's hard for me or for us because, we like to go, throw the football or, listen to music or, do anything and everything, and we feel like we're not represented by, what's happening out there. And I think you know me well enough to, know that as well. So I think that is one of our obligations, right? And we can do that through conversation. We can do that through activism. We can do that through volunteering and civic duties and things like that. So I think, something to really ask yourself is, do you have friends of all faiths, and not necessarily, oh yeah, I work with a guy that is Jewish or Christian or whatnot, but no, do you really have friends that are Muslims and non-Muslims, and are you living a life that represents, true Islam kind of thing? So I think that's something to consider. So.
Thank you. And Dr. Sarah, if you have any parting words?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with everything Dr. Salmaan just said. It's I feel like our example is what shows people, and especially the numbers he said about how many people in America have never even met a Muslim, or have never interacted with a Muslim or whatnot. And so when you do get the chance to remember that, yeah, unfortunately it's not fair, it's not right, but we are a little bit under the spotlight right now. And our deen teaches us, our religion teaches us to be patient and to be kind and to forgive. And so to keep that in mind. But again, those things are only possible when you're managing your stress, when you're taking care of your stress. Then it's possible to be patient. Then it's possible to forgive. When you're the one on edge, when you're overwhelmed, it's very, very difficult to do that. And exactly, Muslim Wellness Foundation is a great resource to find clinicians. Exactly like Dr. Salmaan said, most of us out there are more than happy to help you, have a referral or speak to you. Khalil Center, we have 3 offices now, alhamdulillah, in the Chicago area. We are in Glen Ellen in the south suburbs. We are in Bridgeview in the far south suburbs, and we're in Lincolnwood in the north suburbs. We also just opened an office in the Bay Area, so in the Santa Clara, California area. And we launched a web therapy program where we can do consultation online. All of these are with trained clinicians, so master's level or doctorate level therapists, social workers, clinical social workers, counselors, psychologists. So, exactly like Kameelah said, there's a lot of untapped potential out there. We have a lot of resources. Utilize them. Recognize your stress, ask for help, turn to dua, turn to dhikr, and remember that your actions and our actions as a community speak for us. And inshallah, this time also will pass. Like Dr. Salmaan said, a lot of different groups go this. Many groups are still going through this. We're definitely not the only ones. Muslims or people of color, in this country are definitely not the only ones that are getting ostracized. So, or under the spotlight. So to be patient and to be kind, and again, those things are only possible if you're taking care of yourself.
Yeah. And I also want to emphasize that point that sometimes the first act we go to is kind of an outward act, so it's, how can we host something at the masjid, or how can we demonstrate that we are quote unquote good people. And I always encourage people, first you have to kind of focus inward and really balance yourself, acknowledge what the fears are and the anxiety, but also, kind of be strengthened and feel confident in the fact that if you are the best person, and you're striving every day to improve who you are as a person, as a human being, as a Muslim, then that also serves as an example, right? Sometimes we reach for the, am I going to find the cure for cancer answer? And we don't really acknowledge all of the ways in which, kind of embodying all of the principles that we are really striving to uphold on a daily basis, those small, consistent acts that we talk about, in Islam, are really, really important. And so we shouldn't underestimate, those things that we do, even if it's, again, like what you ended your presentation with, Salmaan, is like smiling. I think sometimes there's been instances in which, because I've had kind of an open demeanor, or if I'm smiling, or if I just say hello to someone like a cashier, that also says a lot. It doesn't have to be like hi, my name is Kameelah, I'm a Muslim, and I'm here to prove to you that we're good people. You know, I think that's a lot of pressure that we place on ourselves, but living your life day to day and striving to be the best person that you can be also sends a very strong positive message, and I don't want us to kind of overlook that. If there are any other questions that anyone who's listening or maybe listening later, definitely feel free to send those along, and we'll be happy to answer. Dr. Sarah and Dr. Salmaan are also available. We'll be sending out kind of a summary of what we discussed today. But if you would like to get more information about Muslim Wellness Foundation, it's a nonprofit organization. All of the information is up there on your screen. You can take a screenshot of it or write it down. But info@muslimwellness.com. Tweet at us at MWF National. Definitely like us on Facebook, Muslim Wellness. And also get connected to other organizations like the Khalil Center, like the Family Center of Knoxville, to expand kind of local and national resources. Again, this is going to be an ongoing conversation that we have. We don't know kind of when the tide will turn in any positive direction, but like I said, I think this also presents us with challenges as well as opportunities, and it's up to us to really figure out how we balance both. And it begins with, you know, each of us as individuals, as well as you know, reaching out to our friends and family members, our community, to make us kind of healthy and stronger so that we can show the ways in which we've been resilient despite some of this adversity. There are many, many people, different groups that are struggling. The anti-Muslim sentiment is extremely high. But we also know that some of the people who are espousing this kind of rhetoric are also anti-immigrant, anti-refugee. They're also anti-black, anti-Latino. So it also, again, part of the opportunities that we are kind of confronted with as a community is that it is, you know, just time for us to also reflect on how we build relationships with other communities, and how we exchange kind of the knowledge and the wisdom that we are able to gain as a result of some of the conditions that we are facing. And lastly, I would say just, you know, make sure that we're kind to ourselves, that we don't have to be super Muslim on a daily basis. You know, knowing what your Dr. Sarah said, your limitations, your boundaries, what you are capable of on any given day, and you know, and making that prayer that perhaps if you feel that you've fallen short or that you feel extreme anxiety, that you can just take a couple seconds, even if it's 30 seconds, just to remember, and if this is something that resonates, that, you know, you put your faith and trust in God, and that you are asking for His mercy and His protection and His guidance always. So I am going to stop there. Thank you all for joining us. Inshallah, we'll resume with another webinar in January. Either we can follow up on these points if there are other questions that people have, or a different topic, but I want to thank you both again for being so incredible and providing so many great resources. And you know, also take care of yourselves. I think sometimes when we are in these situations and we want to help, we have to also just remember that we are also human, and so we can kind of take our own, you know, kind of talk the talk and walk the walk, and make sure that we're also checking in with each other. Alhamdulillah, thank you both so much. And I'm going to let you get back to your families. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Thank you for having us.